The heart monitor flatlined at 3:12 a.m. 13 minutes later, it was still screaming. That single unforgiving tone, the sound every doctor dreads, every parent never survives, cut through the emergency bay of St. Jude's Hospital like an execution order. 13 minutes without a pulse. 13 minutes without oxygen reaching a 2-year-old brain. 13 minutes of 9 specialists doing everything their prestigious degrees had ever taught them and failing. Across the city, in a glass tower overlooking the harbour, Adrian Smith's legal team watched the same clock. At the 13-minute mark, a key man clause would trigger. The merger would collapse. $900 million would evaporate. His rival, Janitor, would own everything. "We've lost him." The words fell like a judge's gavel. Dr. Marcus Chen, chief of pediatric trauma, pulled off his bloodied gloves with the slow, defeated movements of a man who'd just run out of miracles. 18 years of bringing children back from the edge. And he knew. He knew with the cold certainty that only comes from feeling too many small chests go still beneath your hands, that this one wasn't coming back. Time of death? No. Adrian Smith didn't raise his voice. Men who controlled shipping routes and offshore accounts didn't need to shout. But when he stepped forward, 3 doctors instinctively moved back. This was a man who'd built an empire from the docks to the boardrooms, who'd survived wars both literal and corporate, and now he was watching the only thing that mattered slip away. Do something. His hand didn't shake as he reached for his phone. "I'll wire $10 million to this hospital right now. $50 million. Or I'll buy the entire building." His eyes never left his son's still face. Save Jalen. Jalen, the boy he and his late wife had fought 5 years to have. The child who legitimized the Gat Empire, who secured the succession, who was supposed to inherit everything. The heir whose heartbeat was the only thing standing between Adrian Smith and financial annihilation. From the hallway, holding a mop that cost less than the IV stand beside the bed, Becca Marie watched a $14 billion empire crumble in real time, and she was the only one who saw what the doctors had missed. The yellow caution tape across the emergency bay entrance was meant to keep people like Becca Marie out. She walked through it anyway. Her mop bucket rattled against the doorframe, and the sound lost beneath the organized chaos of 9 people trying to resurrect a child who'd been dead for 14 minutes. Becca had spent 6 years in tactical medicine before her discharge. She'd learned early that the loudest room was rarely the most efficient one. "Epi again," Dr. Marcus called out, his hands already moving through the compressions with mechanical precision, "and someone get security to clear this hallway." "His pupils are fixed and dilated," the surgical resident interrupted, her voice carrying the hollow tone of someone who'd already accepted the outcome. "No corneal reflex, no gag. We should keep going until his father says otherwise," Marcus snapped back. But Becca could hear the resignation creeping into his voice. He was running the protocol because protocols were all that stood between doctors and malpractice, not because he believed it would work. Becca's eyes went to the boy's hands. They were clenched, not the loose, empty curl of a body shutting down, but tight, contracted. The fingers bent inward at an unnatural angle, the tendons standing out like wire beneath the skin. She'd seen that position exactly once before, in a dusty field hospital outside Kandahar, when a local interpreter had been dosed with a Soviet-era nerve agent smuggled through the poppy trade. "He's not in cardiac arrest," Becca said. The words cut through the noise like a scalpel. 9 heads turned. 9 sets of eyes found the woman in blue scrubs holding a mop, standing where she had absolutely no right to be. "Kind security." The head nurse moved toward Becca with practiced authority, one hand already reaching for her radio. "We have an unauthorized... Look at his hands." Becca didn't raise her voice. She'd learned in the field that volume was inversely proportional to credibility. Carpal spasm. His jaw is locked. You can see the masseter muscle is rigid, not slack. This isn't a heart attack. It's a localized neurotoxin affecting the motor neurons. You're treating the symptom, not the cause. Marcus didn't stop compressions, but his rhythm faltered for half a beat. That's impossible. His tox screen was... Wrong place to look, Becca interrupted. She was already moving toward the table, her janitor's cart forgotten. Standard tox screens check blood. This is tissue-level poisoning. I probably delivered in a topical ointment or through something he'd put in his mouth, a toy. Medication. Something he'd have contact with regularly enough that trace amounts could build up. Adrian Smith's voice came from the corner, low and lethal. What are you saying? I'm saying someone's been poisoning your son for weeks. Becca reached the table. The head nurse tried to block her, but Adrian's hand shot out, stopping the woman mid-step. Let her talk. Becca looked at the monitors, then at the boy's small form beneath the trauma blanket. The neurotoxin is blocking the signal from his brain to his heart. The compressions aren't working because you're trying to mechanically restart something that's electrically locked, or you need to flush the receptor sites and reset the neural pathway. There's no protocol for that, the surgical resident said, but she'd stepped back, uncertainty bleeding into her expression. There is. Becca's hands were steady as she reached for the IV access port. We used it in theater when we couldn't evac fast enough. Military medicine doesn't make it into civilian textbooks because it's too aggressive, too risky, and it requires materials most hospitals don't stock. She glanced at Marcus. But you're a level 1 trauma center. You have everything I need. The silence stretched for 3 seconds that felt like 3 hours. What do you need? Marcus asked. Becca rattled off a list of medications that made the resident's eyes widen. Atropine in doses that would stop an adult's heart. Pralidoxime chloride. Magnesium sulfate. Diazepam. She was building a chemical reset sequence, the kind of controlled crisis that either broke through the blockade or killed the patient outright. That cocktail could... He's already dead, Adrian said flatly. Do it. Becca's hands moved with the muscle memory of someone who'd performed this procedure in situations where hesitation meant body bags. She administered the sequence in precise intervals, watching the monitors for the microsecond changes that would tell her whether the receptors were clearing. 30 seconds, 1 minute, 90 seconds. The flat line continued its scream. Then, at 2 minutes and 18 seconds, the monitor hiccuped. 1 beat. Weak, irregular, but there. Then another. The line began to sketch out a rhythm that looked almost like life. Sinus rhythm, the resident breathed. Oh my God. But we have sinus rhythm. Jalen's fingers uncurled. His jaw loosened. Color began creeping back into his lips like dawn breaking over frozen ground. Marcus stepped back from the table, staring at Becca as if she'd just walked through a wall. Who are you? Becca picked up her mop. Nobody. I'm the janitor. But Adrian Smith was already moving, his phone out, his voice carrying the clipped authority of a man issuing orders that would reshape the next 24 hours, because he understood what the doctors didn't, that the woman who'd just saved his son had also saved his $900 million merger, and in his world, that kind of value didn't push a mop. It commanded boardrooms. The question wasn't who she was. The question was who she was about to become. Becca made it to the service elevator before Adrian Smith caught up with her, but she'd known he would. Men like him didn't let assets walk away, and she'd just proven herself to be an asset worth more than the hospital's annual operating budget. The elevator doors were closing when his hand shot through the gap, triggering the sensors. They stuttered open again, revealing a man who looked nothing like the desperate father from 30 minutes ago. This was the Adrian Smith who controlled shipping lanes and private equity firms. The one who'd built an empire from dock work and blood money, then legitimized it through mergers and offshore accounts. His suit probably cost more than Becca's car. His watch definitely did. Ms. Marie. He stepped into the elevator without asking permission. We need to talk. I'm on shift until 6. Becca kept her eyes on the descending floor numbers. And I don't do autographs. I'm not looking for an autograph. The doors closed, sealing them in 8 feet of stainless steel and fluorescent lighting. I'm looking for someone who can see things other people miss. Someone who understands that the most dangerous attacks don't come from the front. Then hire a security consultant. I'm sure you have a dozen on retainer. I have 17. Adrian's reflection in the polished doors showed a moan calculating odds in real time. None of them saved my son's life. None of them spotted a poison that 9 doctors missed. And none of them would have had the operational nerve to override a trauma team in the middle of a code. The elevator reached the basement. The doors opened onto a hallway that smelled like industrial cleaner and old coffee. Becca stepped out. Adrian followed. Your son is stable, Becca said, walking toward the janitorial supply room. The neurotoxin will clear his system in 48 hours. Keep him hydrated, monitor his vitals, and make sure nobody brings him anything from outside the hospital. Not toys, not food, not medication. Nothing. Because someone in my organization is trying to kill him. Trying to incapacitate him. The Smith estate sat on 12 acres of waterfront property that had been in the family since Adrian's grandfather ran bootleg whiskey through the harbor. Becca arrived at dawn in a car service that cost more than her monthly rent, carrying a duffel bag with 3 changes of clothes and a trauma kit she'd assembled from her own supplies. The nurse Adrian had hired to monitor Jalen met her at the service entrance, not the front door. The woman made that choice deliberately, a subtle reminder that consultancy fees didn't erase the class lines drawn in houses like this. I'm Diane Mitchell, the woman said, her smile professionally warm and personally cold. I'll be coordinating Jalen's in-home care. You must be the specialist Mr. Smith mentioned. Becca caught the emphasis on specialist, the way some people said pest control when they meant exterminator. Becca Marie, I'm here to make sure he doesn't flatline again. Well, we have a full medical suite on the 2nd floor, state-of-the-art monitoring equipment, direct line to St. Jude's, and I've been a pediatric intensive care nurse for 12 years. I think we can manage a simple recovery protocol. Diane turned to lead the way inside, and that's when Becca saw it. The watch. It caught the early morning light coming through the service door, a flash of rose gold and crystal that didn't belong on a nurse's wrist. Becca had spent enough time in luxury retail stores during undercover operations to recognize a Patek Philippe when she saw one. The specific model, a 24 with a diamond-set bezel, retailed for around $180,000. A pediatric ICU nurse, even a good one, made maybe $60,000 a year. That watch represented 3 years of gross salary, before taxes, before rent, before food. Nobody wore 3 years of income on their wrist unless someone else had paid for it. Becca filed the information away and followed Diane through a house that looked like it had been designed by someone who confused wealth with taste. Marble everywhere. Chandeliers that belonged in hotels. Art that was expensive without being interesting. The medical suite at least was functional. It had been set up in what was probably once a library, with hospital-grade monitors flanking a bed where Jalen slept, his small chest rising and falling, with the steady rhythm of someone who didn't know he'd been dead for 13 minutes 2 days ago. He's stable, Diane said, checking the monitors with practiced efficiency. Heart rate normal, oxygen saturation at 98%. No signs of neurological damage. Honestly, I'm not sure why Mr. Smith felt the need to bring in outside help. Because someone poisoned his son, Becca said evenly, and that someone had access to his daily routine. Diane's hands stilled on the monitor controls. The investigation hasn't determined. The investigation is looking in the wrong places. Becca moved to the IV stand, examining the lines with the kind of attention that made people nervous. Neurotoxins don't appear spontaneously. They're delivered, systematically, over weeks, which means someone close enough to have regular contact. You're suggesting someone on the household staff. I'm suggesting you keep detailed logs of everyone who enters this room, every nurse, every housekeeper, every delivery person. Time stamps, ID verification, and a witness signature. Becca pulled a tablet from her bag, the kind of encrypted military-grade hardware that didn't come from consumer electronics stores. Starting now. Diane's professional mask slipped for just a second, revealing something harder underneath. Mr. Smith hired me to care for his son, not to spy on the staff. Mr. Smith hired you to keep his son alive. I'm here to make sure you do. Becca pulled up a chair next to Jalen's bed, settling in with the stillness of someone who could wait forever. Now, how about you walk me through everyone who has access to this floor? Start with the people Jalen sees every day. For the next hour, Diane provided names, schedules, and backgrounds with the efficiency of someone reciting a script she'd rehearsed. The head chef who'd been with the family for 8 years, the housekeeper who came 3 times a week, the physical therapist, the tutor, the rotation of security personnel who changed shifts every 12 hours. Becca listened, made notes, and watched Diane's wrist. The watch caught the light every time the woman gestured. Rose gold to diamonds, a little too bright, a little too obvious, the kind of gift someone gave when they wanted to be remembered, when they needed to ensure loyalty, when they were buying silence. That evening, after Diane left for a scheduled break, Becca pulled up the property's security footage on her tablet. It took 20 minutes to hack through the encryption. Adrian's IT team was competent, but not military grade, and another 10 to find what she was looking for. Diane Mitchell, meeting with a man in the estate's garden 3 weeks ago. The angle was wrong to catch his face, but Becca didn't need it. She recognized the car parked at the service gate, a Mercedes S-Class with custom plates that belonged to Janitor Corporation's executive fleet. The same company trying to buy out Adrian's merger, and the same company that would profit from Jalen's death. Becca took a screenshot, encrypted it, and sent it to the secure number Adrian had given her. 3 words. Found your virus. The reply came back in seconds. Prove it. Becca looked at Jalen, sleeping peacefully in a bed surrounded by machines designed to keep him alive, and people paid to let him die. She'd spent 6 years in tactical medicine, learning that the most dangerous weapon wasn't the one you could see. It was the one already inside your perimeter, wearing a friendly face and a very expensive watch. Proving it wouldn't be hard. Surviving the proof would be the interesting part. Enjoying the story? Hit that subscribe button now. Your support means a lot to me, more than you understand. The medication arrived at 10 a.m., delivered by a courier service that Adrian's household had used for 3 years. Becca watched from the second-floor window as the man in the unmarked sedan handed an insulated package to the gate security, collected a signature, and drove away without ever entering the property. Standard protocol, 0 red flags, which was exactly what made it perfect. Becca met the package at the door before Diane could. I'll handle the medication verification today. "That's my responsibility," Diane said, reaching for the insulated bag with the territorial instinct of someone protecting their domain. "I've been managing Jalen's prescriptions since someone started poisoning him." Becca didn't move her hand from the bag. "Which means your protocols have a hole in them. So today, we're trying mine." Diane's jaw tightened, but she stepped back. The watch on her wrist caught the hallway light again, rose gold and accusatory. She was smart enough not to push, which meant she was smart enough to be dangerous. Becca carried the bag to the medical suite and locked the door. The package contained 4 prescription bottles, each bearing the seal of St. Jude's Pharmacy, each with labels that matched Jalen's current medication regimen. Steroids to reduce inflammation, anticonvulsants to prevent seizures, electrolyte supplements to stabilize his system, and a custom compound that was supposed to help his neural pathways recover from the toxin exposure. Becca opened the custom compound first. The pills looked right. White, oblong, with the manufacturer's stamp visible on each tablet. But when she broke one open and ran it through the portable spectrometer she'd brought from her own equipment stash, the reading came back wrong. The active ingredient was there, but so was something else. A trace element that didn't belong in a neural recovery medication. Sodium phenobarbital, a sedative. Not enough to kill, but enough to keep a child in a fog, enough to slow his recovery, enough to make every day a little worse instead of a little better. She tested the other bottles. Same pattern, correct medication, wrong additives. Someone had been doctoring the prescriptions with precision, adding just enough interference to keep Jalen sick without making it obvious. Becca photographed the results and sent them to Adrian with a message. "Check your trading activity for the past 3 weeks. Look for unusual withdrawals or transfer authorizations." The reply came back in 4 minutes, a secure file link. Becca opened it on her encrypted tablet and felt something cold settle in her chest. Adrian's offshore accounts had been hemorrhaging money for 21 days. Not in obvious chunks that would trigger fraud alerts, but in small, algorithmically timed transfers that looked like legitimate business expenses. Payment to vendors that didn't exist, consulting fees to shell corporations, wire transfers to accounts that vanished 30 seconds after receiving the funds. The total damage was approaching $47 million. But the real target wasn't the money, it was the distraction. Every hour Adrian spent at the hospital was an hour he wasn't monitoring his portfolio. But every crisis with Jalen was a crisis that pulled his attention from the merger negotiations. Every day the boy stayed sick was another day Janeth had to position himself for the hostile takeover. The poisoning wasn't about killing Jalen. It was about keeping him in exactly the right state of controlled deterioration, sick enough to demand Adrian's full attention, stable enough that Adrian wouldn't abandon the merger entirely to focus on his son's health, a perfect balance of crisis management that left him vulnerable on 2 fronts. Becca pulled up her secure messaging app and sent a new message to Adrian. "Janeth isn't trying to kill your son. He's using him as a distraction while he dismantles your empire. The medication is being dosed to keep Jalen sick, not dead. It's market manipulation disguised as a murder attempt." Adrian's response was immediate. "How do I stop it?" Becca looked at the 4 prescription bottles lined up on the counter, each one a tiny weapon in a war that was being fought with balance sheets and pharmaceuticals instead of bullets. Cut off his access to the medication supply chain. I need the name of everyone who touches these prescriptions from the moment they're written to the moment they arrive at your door. Pharmacy staff, delivery services, quality control, everyone. 3 minutes later, her tablet lit up with a document that was 60 pages long. Personnel files, courier contracts, pharmacy partnerships, and vendor agreements. Becca started reading, looking for the pattern that would tell her where the contamination was happening. She found it on page 42. The courier service had changed ownership 3 weeks ago, and the new parent company was buried under 4 layers of shell corporations. But Becca had spent enough time following money trails in combat zones to recognize the structure. It led back to a holding company that shared board members with Janitor Corporation. They'd bought the delivery service, not to steal the medications, but to tamper with them. Every prescription that left St. Jude's was legitimate. Every prescription that arrived at the Smith estate was poisoned. Becca sent Adrian one more message. Found the entry point. Janitor owns your courier service. Every delivery for the past 3 weeks has been compromised. The reply came back with the speed of a man who'd just realized how completely he'd been outmaneuvered. Can you fix it? Becca looked at Jalen. They were sleeping peacefully in a bed surrounded by medicine that was slowly killing him. Part of a scheme that was simultaneously destroying his father's financial empire. She typed, "Yes, but you're not going to like how." Because fixing it meant doing more than just switching courier services or changing pharmacies. It meant exposing the entire operation, which meant Janitor would know they'd found him. And cornered men with $900 million on the line didn't surrender quietly. They escalated, and Becca needed to be ready when they did. The news broke at 6 a.m. on a Thursday. St. Jude's Hospital, a 300-bed facility with a Level 1 trauma center and a pediatric wing that served the entire metropolitan area, had received a purchase offer from Meridian Health Partners. The bid was $420 million, 30% above market value, what with a commitment to maintain all existing staff and expand services. On paper, it looked like a philanthropic windfall. Becca knew better. She was reviewing Jalen's overnight vitals when Adrian called. No greeting, just 3 words that carried the weight of a man watching his last defensive position collapse. Janitor bought Meridian. Becca pulled up the acquisition documents on her tablet. Meridian Health Partners had been incorporated 6 weeks ago in Delaware. Its board of directors included 2 former executives from Janitor Corporation and a venture capitalist who sat on 3 of Janitor's subsidiary boards. The structure was clean enough to pass regulatory review, dirty enough that anyone looking closely could see the puppet strings. "He doesn't want the hospital," Becca said. "He wants the records. Every test result, not every diagnosis, every medication Jalen's been prescribed. If Janitor controls the hospital, he controls the narrative." Adrian's voice had the flat calm of someone doing tactical math in real time. "He can rewrite Jalen's medical history to show the poisoning was accidental, or pre-existing, or my fault for negligent supervision. And if your son's condition is legally classified as your failure to provide adequate care, the board can remove me from the company for cause. No severance, no stock options, no protection under the merger agreement." Adrian exhaled slowly. He doesn't just take the company. He takes everything. Becca was already moving, grabbing her encrypted laptop and the external drive she kept in her go-bag. How long before the acquisition closes? The hospital board votes in 72 hours. What Meridian is offering to settle all outstanding debt and fund a new cancer wing. St. Jude's has been operating in the red for 2 years. They're going to accept. Then we have 72 hours to sanitize Jalen's records before Janitor gets access to the system. Sanitize how? His medical history is distributed across a dozen databases. Lab systems, pharmacy records, doctor's notes, billing codes. You can't just delete. I'm not going to delete anything. Becca opened her laptop and pulled up an encrypted messaging app she hadn't used in 3 years. I'm going to make sure what Janitor finds tells a very different story than what actually happened. The first message went to a number in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. The second to a contractor in Berlin who specialized in medical database security. or the third to someone Becca had served with in Kandahar, who now worked for a cybersecurity firm that didn't advertise and didn't take clients who asked too many questions. All three messages said the same thing. I need a clean room retrofit on a hospital EMR system. Timeline is 60 hours. Budget is whatever it costs. The responses came back within minutes. The Fort Bragg contact sent a secure file transfer link. The Berlin contractor sent a price quote that would have bought a new car. The Kandahar veteran sent 3 words: still owe you. Becca downloaded the tools, paid the contractor, and sent coordinates to the person who owed her a favor. By 8 a.m., she had everything she needed. The attack vector was simple. St. Jude's electronic medical record system had been installed in 2019, which meant it was running on infrastructure that predated the latest security protocols. Becca didn't need to hack the system. She needed to access it legitimately, modify the records in ways that wouldn't trigger audit logs, and ensure that when Janeth's team eventually gained control, they'd find exactly what Becca wanted them to find. She started with the toxicology reports. The original screens showed trace elements of the neurotoxin in Jalen's system, clear evidence of deliberate poisoning. Becca left those intact, but added supplementary notes indicating the compounds could also be found in contaminated water supplies, industrial runoff, and household cleaning products commonly used in wealthy estates. Reasonable doubt, wrapped in medical jargon. Next, she modified the medication logs. All the prescriptions Jalen had received were documented down to the pill count. Becca adjusted the timestamps and dosing schedules to show minor discrepancies, nothing that would indicate tampering, but enough to suggest the household staff might have been administering medications incorrectly. Not maliciously, just carelessly. More reasonable doubt. The admission notes were trickier. Dr. Marcus had documented Becca's intervention in detail, including her identification of the neurotoxin and the unorthodox resuscitation protocol. That narrative made her a hero and made the poisoning obvious. Becca rewrote it. In the new version, she was a former paramedic who happened to be on site during a shift change. The neurotoxin became a suspected environmental contaminant. The resuscitation became standard advanced cardiac life support with modifications. The truth became plausible fiction. By noon, she'd created a parallel medical history that was technically accurate, legally defensible, and completely useless for Janeth's purposes. Every piece of evidence that pointed to deliberate poisoning now had an alternative explanation. Every detail that implicated the household had been softened into negligence rather than malice. And every single change was backed up on Becca's encrypted drive, time-stamped and authenticated, so Adrian would have the real records if he ever needed them. Becca sent Adrian a message. Records are sanitized. When Janeth takes control of the hospital, or he'll find a sick kid with overprotective parents and a close call that was nobody's fault. Adrian's reply came back immediately. What about the nurse? Diane knows what really happened. Becca looked at the security footage, still queued on her tablet. Diane meeting with Janeth's representative. Diane accepting payment. Diane wearing a watch worth 3 years of salary. She typed, "Let me handle Diane." Because the records could be rewritten, the databases could be sanitized, and the narrative could be controlled. But witnesses were a different problem entirely, and Becca had learned a long time ago that the most effective way to handle a witness wasn't to silence them. It was to make sure nobody would believe them when they finally talked. The photo arrived at 2 a.m., sent to a phone number Becca hadn't used in 4 years. The device itself was buried in her go bag, a burner she'd kept from her military days for emergencies that required complete operational security. It had never received a message until tonight. The image showed her brother Daniel, bound to a chair in what looked like a warehouse. His face was bruised but intact. His eyes were open, alert, angry. He was alive, which meant whoever had taken him wanted leverage, not a body count. The second message came 30 seconds later. Just text, no photo. Your brother for the boy. Miss the next medication cycle. Let nature take its course. Daniel walks free in 12 hours. Becca stared at the screen, her pulse steady despite the adrenaline trying to flood her system. She'd been trained to compartmentalize, to separate the emotional response from the tactical one. Right now, while she needed the tactical mind that had kept her alive in Kandahar, not the sister who'd helped raise Daniel after their parents died. She opened the encrypted messaging app and sent Adrian a single line. They have my brother. The reply came back in less than a minute. Who? Janeth. He's demanding I withhold Jalen's medication. If I do, your son relapses. If I don't, Danny dies. Adrian's response took longer this time. When it came through, it was clinical, the kind of cost-benefit analysis that built empires. How much time before Jalen's next dose? 6 hours? And how long before the relapse becomes critical? 18 to 24 hours. But the damage starts immediately. Every hour without medication is neural deterioration we might not be able to reverse. Becca moved through the dark hallways of the estate toward Jalen's room. The boy was sleeping, his monitors showing vitals that had finally stabilized after 3 weeks of systematic poisoning. She'd fought to get him here, fought to clear the toxins from his system, fought to rewrite the records that would protect Adrian's empire. Now Janeth wanted her to undo it all. Her phone buzzed again. Adrian, where is your brother? Unknown. The photo shows a warehouse, industrial area, probably within 20 miles of the city, based on the ambient noise patterns. Can you find him? Not in 6 hours. Not without resources I don't have access to anymore. The silence stretched for 3 minutes. Becca checked Jalen's IV lines, verified the medication schedule, and calculated how long she could delay before the damage became permanent. The math was brutal. Every decision had a body count, and Adrian's next message carried the weight of a man who'd built an empire by making impossible choices. I'll find your brother. You keep my son alive. Becca's fingers hesitated over the keyboard. You don't have the infrastructure to track a kidnapping in 6 hours. No. But I have something better. I have people who owe me favors that can't be repaid with money. She understood what he meant. Adrian Smith hadn't built his empire through legal channels alone. He'd started on the docks, moved through the grey markets, and eventually legitimized himself through corporate acquisitions. But the connections from the early days didn't disappear. They just went underground. I need a location, Becca typed, and I need it in 4 hours. You'll have it in 3. Becca looked at Jalen. They sleeping peacefully in a bed that had become the center of a war fought with medicine and markets instead of bullets. She'd saved this boy once by breaking protocol. Now she had to save her brother by trusting a man she'd known for less than a month to deploy resources she couldn't verify. Her phone buzzed with a new message, this time from the burner. A countdown timer had appeared on the screen. 5 hours, 53 minutes. Below it, another photo of Daniel. The timestamp showed it had been taken 2 minutes ago. They were watching, making sure she knew they could execute at any moment. Becca sent one final message to Adrian. If you can't find him, I need to know before the deadline. I won't sacrifice your son, but I also won't let my brother die without trying every option. But Adrian's response was immediate. You won't have to choose. I'm not in the habit of losing. But Becca had been in combat long enough to know that confidence and capability weren't the same thing. People lost all the time, even people who'd spent their entire lives winning. The difference was whether you had a contingency plan for when the first strategy failed. She pulled up her encrypted files and started building one. 3 hours to find Daniel through Adrian's network. If that failed, she had 2 hours to execute an alternative strategy that involved making Janeth think she'd complied while actually protecting Jalen with a medication protocol that wouldn't show up on standard monitoring. It was possible. Barely. But it required resources she didn't have, cooperation from people who didn't trust her, and a level of precision that left zero room for error. Becca looked at the countdown timer on her burner phone, then at Jalen's sleeping form. 4 years ago, she'd left the military because she was tired of making choices where people died, no matter what she decided. She'd become a janitor, specifically to avoid situations where her skills mattered, where her decisions had consequences that echoed beyond mop buckets and floor wax. Now she was right back in the field, caught between two lives that both mattered, forced to trust a man whose empire was built on the same kind of ruthlessness that had kidnapped her brother in the first place. The countdown timer ticked down another minute. Becca picked up her phone and started making calls to people who specialized in finding things that didn't want to be found, because Adrian might have people who owed him favors. But Becca had people who owed her their lives, and she was about to collect every single debt. The solution came to Becca at 3:45 a.m., 2 hours before Jalen's next scheduled medication and 3 hours before Janeth's deadline. It wasn't elegant, and it wasn't safe, but it had the singular advantage of being possible. She didn't have to choose between her brother and Adrian's son. She just had to execute 2 operations simultaneously, with zero margin for error. Becca called Adrian first. "I need you to trigger a massive stock buyback at exactly 7 a.m. Target every share of Janeth Corporation that's publicly traded. I'd drive the price up fast enough that it forces his margin calls. That'll cost me close to 200 million in capital. I don't have liquid right now." Adrian's voice carried no hesitation, just calculation. "And if he doesn't panic sell, I'm holding worthless paper in a company I don't want. He'll sell, because at 7:15, I'm going to make him think his primary asset just became a liability." Becca pulled up the financial terminals on her tablet, overlaying them with the tactical map she'd been building for the past 2 hours. The warehouse where they're holding Danny is in the Port District, Building 7C, and Janeth uses it as a holding facility for shipments that need to stay off the books. How do you know that? Because one of your dock supervisors owed me a favor. Becca had spent the past 90 minutes calling in every debt she'd accumulated during her years in tactical medicine. The dock supervisor had a daughter who'd overdosed 3 years ago. Becca had kept her alive long enough for the ambulance to arrive. He's been watching Janeth's operations for leverage. When I described the warehouse in the photo, he gave me the address. So you extract your brother while I drain Janeth's liquidity. What's the connection? The connection is timing. Becca started laying out the operation in the kind of clinical detail that had once briefed colonels on combat insertions. At 7 a.m., you start the buyback, or Janeth's trading desk will see the volume spike and know someone's making a move. They'll scramble to figure out who and why. That's a 15-minute window of distraction. At 7:05, I breach the warehouse. At 7:15, I trigger the fire suppression system, which will force an evacuation and alert the fire department. Janeth will have to choose between securing his hostage or managing a public emergency at a facility that's not supposed to exist. He'll choose the emergency. He can't afford the exposure. Exactly. Which means Danny walks out with the firefighters while Janeth's legal team is busy explaining why they have an undocumented warehouse full of shipments that violate about 6 different import regulations. Becca checked her equipment one final time. Tactical vest, encrypted radio, medical kit, and a Sig Sauer P226 she'd kept from her military days. By 7:30, Janeth is dealing with a PR crisis, a financial hemorrhage, and a kidnapping that just became a liability instead of leverage. And if something goes wrong, then you still execute the buyback. Danny's rescue doesn't depend on the market move, but the market move gives me the distraction I need. Becca grabbed her go-bag and headed for the door. Keep Jalen on his medication schedule no matter what happens. If I'm not back in 3 hours, assume I failed and lock down the estate. Adrian's response came after a pause that felt longer than it probably was. I'll have my security team on standby. If you need extraction, I won't. Becca had run solo operations in worse conditions with less intel. Just make sure Janeth's traders are watching their screens at 7 a.m. I need them paralyzed by confusion for exactly 15 minutes. She ended the call and drove toward the Port District in a car she'd borrowed from the estate's motor pool. The warehouse sat between two legitimate shipping facilities, close enough to blend in, far enough from surveillance cameras to maintain deniability. Becca parked 3 blocks away and approached on foot, moving through the pre-dawn shadows like she'd done in a dozen other countries where the wrong silhouette meant a bullet. At 6:58, she was positioned outside the warehouse's east entrance, watching the security rotation through a gap in the fence. 2 guards, both armed, both bored. They were expecting a janitor to miss a medication dosage, not a tactical insertion. At 7 a.m., her phone buzzed with a message from Adrian. Buyback initiated. Stock price climbing. Becca counted to 5 minutes, giving Janeth's team time to notice the market movement and panic. Then she moved. The lock on the service entrance was commercial grade, but not military. It took her 40 seconds to bypass. She slipped inside, moving through the warehouse with the muscle memory of someone who'd cleared buildings in Fallujah. The layout was predictable. Office space on the ground floor, storage above, holding areas in the basement where noise didn't carry. She found Daniel on the lower level, still bound to the chair from the photos. 1 guard stood watch, scrolling through his phone with the distracted attention of someone who didn't expect trouble. Or Becca put him down with a strike to the carotid that would leave him unconscious for 20 minutes and no permanent damage. She cut Daniel's restraints with a tactical knife, pressing a finger to his lips before he could speak. "Can you walk?" she whispered. Daniel nodded, rubbing his wrists where the zip ties had cut circulation. "Then we're leaving. Stay behind me. Stay quiet. And when I say run, you run." They moved back through the warehouse, avoiding the main corridors, using the service passages that every industrial building had for maintenance access. At 7:14, Becca triggered the fire suppression system from a control panel near the loading dock. Alarms shrieked, water cascaded from ceiling sprinklers, and somewhere above them, guards started shouting about evacuating before the fire department arrived. Becca and Daniel walked out the service entrance into the gathering dawn, just 2 more people fleeing a malfunctioning building. By the time Janeth's team realized the hostage was gone, they were 3 blocks away, and the Port District was crawling with firefighters documenting a warehouse that wasn't supposed to exist. Becca's phone buzzed at 7:32. "Adrian, Janeth just sold 40% of his holdings to cover margin calls. His liquidity is gone." She typed back with one hand while guiding Daniel toward the car. "My brother is secure, returning to the estate." The 2-pronged operation had worked, not because it was elegant, but because it forced Janeth to fight on 2 fronts simultaneously, financial and physical, with resources he couldn't deploy fast enough. Tactical arbitrage, to take advantage of the gap between what your opponent can do and what they can do quickly enough to matter. Becca had learned it in combat. She'd just applied it to corporate warfare, and Janeth had lost on both fronts. The Harbour Grand Ballroom held 400 of the city's wealthiest donors, a collection of old money and new fortunes gathered under crystal chandeliers to bid on art they didn't need for causes they'd forget by morning. Becca had attended exactly one formal event in her life, a military ball where she'd worn dress blues and counted the minutes until she could leave. Tonight, she wore a gown that cost more than her first car. Adrian had sent it to her room at the estate with a note that contained 3 words: "Trust me, tonight." The dress was midnight blue, structured like armor, but designed by someone who understood that power didn't require exposure. It fit perfectly, which meant Adrian had gotten her measurements from somewhere, probably the same intelligence network that had tracked Daniel to the warehouse. Becca arrived at 8 p.m., 45 minutes after the event started, exactly when Adrian had told her to. The board of directors would be gathered in the private salon for pre-dinner drinks. Janitor would be working the room, building consensus for the announcement he'd planned to make during the auction. An announcement that would declare Adrian Smith unfit to lead his own company. The evidence was already prepared. Jalen's medical crisis, the millions hemorrhaging from offshore accounts while Adrian was distracted, the negligent management that had allowed a child to be poisoned under his own roof. Janitor had spent 3 weeks constructing a narrative that turned tragedy into incompetence, and tonight he was going to present it to the board as a vote of no confidence. What he didn't know was that Becca had spent the same 3 weeks building a counter-narrative. She found the private salon on the 2nd floor, guarded by a young man in hotel livery who looked bored until Becca showed him the invitation Adrian had arranged. The seal of the Smith family company, embossed in gold, bought her access that a janitor's uniform never could. The salon held 12 people, the board of directors, each one representing voting shares that could shift the balance of power in the company. Janitor stood at the center, holding court with the practiced ease of someone who'd been born into wealth instead of building it from docks and blood money. He saw Becca the moment she entered. His expression flickered. Confusion, recognition, calculation, before settling back into polished charm. "Ms. Marie," he said, her name carrying just enough emphasis to signal to the room that she was unexpected. "I didn't realize Adrian was bringing guests to board functions." "I'm not a guest." Becca crossed the room with the same tactical precision she'd used to clear the warehouse 3 days ago. Different terrain, same principles. Control the space, identify the threats, execute with confidence. "I'm presenting evidence." The room went quiet with the particular silence of powerful people sensing a shift in dynamics. Becca pulled a tablet from her clutch, the same encrypted device she'd used to sanitize Jalen's medical records, and connected it to the salon's display screen. For the past 3 weeks, this board has been receiving information about Adrian Smith's management capabilities, specifically his inability to protect his own son and his failure to monitor critical financial operations. "This is highly inappropriate," Janitor started, but the board chair, a woman named Patricia Keene, who'd built a pharmaceutical empire before retiring to collect board seats, raised one hand. "Let her speak." Becca advanced to the first slide, financial transaction records, highlighted and annotated. "These are the unauthorized transfers from Smith Corporation's offshore accounts, $47 million over 21 days. The transactions were routed through shell corporations owned by Meridian Health Partners, which is itself owned by Janitor Corporation." She let that sink in for exactly 3 seconds before advancing to the next slide. "These are the medical records for Jalen Smith, showing systematic poisoning with a neurotoxin that was delivered through contaminated medication. The courier service responsible for those deliveries was acquired by Janitor Corporation 3 weeks before the poisoning began." Janitor's expression remained perfectly composed. But Becca had spent years reading micro-expressions in combat zones. She saw the tension in his jaw, the slight widening of his pupils. He was calculating odds, looking for exits. She didn't give him time to find one. The poisoning wasn't designed to kill Adrian Smith. It was designed to keep him sick enough to distract his father, while Janitor Corporation executed a coordinated financial raid and positioned itself to take control of this company through a manufactured crisis. Becca advanced to the final slide. Security footage from the Smith estate showing Diane Mitchell meeting with Janitor's representatives. Financial records showing payments from Janitor Corporation to a personal account in Diane's name. Time-stamped documentation of every contaminated medication delivery. "This isn't incompetence," Becca said, her voice carrying the same clinical precision she'd used to brief military operations. "This is sabotage, and the evidence has been submitted to both the SEC and the FBI." The silence in the room had weight now, but Patricia Keene was staring at the screen with the expression of someone recalculating risk assessments in real time. Janitor recovered first, his smile never slipping. "These allegations are serious, Ms. Marie. Do you have proof they came from my organization and not from, say, a disgruntled employee trying to frame? I have your signature on the acquisition documents for the courier service." Becca pulled up another file. "And recorded conversations between your legal team and Diane Mitchell discussing dosage schedules, and bank records showing the exact amounts paid for her cooperation." She looked directly at him. "Would you like me to continue, or would you prefer to withdraw your motion of no confidence before this becomes a criminal investigation instead of a corporate dispute?" Patricia Keene stood, resetting her drink down with the finality of a gavel. "I think we've heard enough. The board will be tabling any votes regarding leadership pending a full investigation into these allegations." She looked at Janitor with the cold assessment of someone who'd survived 50 years in pharmaceutical boardrooms. "You should speak with your lawyers." Becca disconnected her tablet and walked out of the salon, leaving behind a room full of board members who were already pulling out their phones to call their own legal teams. In the hallway, Adrian was waiting. He didn't ask how it went. He'd probably been listening through the same kind of surveillance equipment Becca had used to gather half the evidence. "The gown suits you," he said. Becca looked down at the midnight blue dress that had transformed her from invisible janitor to visible threat. "It's tactical armor with better tailoring." "That's what I told the designer." Adrian offered his arm. "Shall we rejoin the gala? I believe they're auctioning a Picasso in 20 minutes, and I'd hate for Janitor to outbid me." Becca took his arm, and together they walked back into the ballroom, where the city's elite were bidding on art, while upstairs, in a private salon, an empire was quietly collapsing. Janitor Corporation filed for bankruptcy protection 6 days after the gala. The announcement came at 4 p.m. on a Tuesday, delivered through a law firm that specialized in managing corporate collapses. The official statement blamed market volatility and unforeseen liquidity challenges. It made no mention of systematic fraud, or medical sabotage, or the FBI investigation that had frozen every account Janitor controlled. Becca watched the news from Jalen's room, where the boy was sitting up in bed, working through a puzzle that was probably too advanced for a 2-year-old, but keeping him engaged anyway. His color had returned. His motor control was steady. The neurological assessments showed no lasting damage from either the poisoning or the 13 minutes he'd spent flatlined on a hospital table. He was, by every medical measure, a miracle. Adrian arrived at 5 p.m., carrying 2 glasses of bourbon that probably cost more than Becca's monthly salary when she'd been pushing a mop. He handed her one without asking if she drank. "The merger closed this morning," he said, settling into the chair beside Jalen's bed. $900 million, exactly as projected. The board voted unanimously to proceed. Congratulations. Becca took a sip of the bourbon. It tasted like smoke and money. Janeth's assets are being liquidated to cover his debts. The hospital acquisition fell through when Meridian's funding disappeared. St. Jude's remains independent. Adrian watched his son fit puzzle pieces together with the focused intensity that children brought to tasks adults had long since stopped caring about. Diane Mitchell is cooperating with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. She'll serve 18 months for conspiracy and fraud. Could have been worse. Could have been better. Adrian's voice carried no satisfaction, just the flat assessment of someone who understood that justice and consequences rarely aligned. She poisoned my son for a watch and a wire transfer. What 18 months feels insufficient. Becca didn't disagree, but she'd seen enough of the legal system to know that the punishment rarely matched the crime. What about the courier service? Shut down. The delivery staff had no knowledge of the tampering. They were just following routes. Adrian finished his bourbon in one swallow. I bought the company's assets at the bankruptcy auction. Seemed appropriate. They sat in silence for a moment, watching Jalen complete his puzzle with a small sound of triumph. The boy looked up at his father, grinning, and Adrian's expression softened in a way Becca had never seen before. Not the corporate strategist or the dock fighter, or the man who'd threatened doctors with 9-figure bribes. Just a father watching his son do something ordinary and perfect. I want you to stay, Adrian said. They'd still looking at Jalen. Becca had been expecting this. As what? The house medic. As my director of strategic operations. Adrian turned to face her fully. You saved my son's life. You identified a coordinated attack that my entire security team missed. You sanitized evidence, extracted a hostage, and dismantled a hostile takeover using skills that don't appear on any resume. He set his empty glass on the side table with deliberate precision. I need someone who sees threats before they materialize. Someone who understands that the most dangerous attacks come from inside the perimeter. Someone who isn't afraid to tell me when I'm wrong. You have 17 security consultants. I have 17 people who protect my assets. I need someone who protects my family. Adrian leaned forward, elbows on his knees, or speaking with the intensity of someone making an offer that wouldn't be repeated. The salary is 7 figures. The benefits include housing, transportation, and full operational autonomy. You report directly to me. You answer to no one else. And you have the authority to audit anyone in my organization, including me. Becca looked at Jalen, who'd abandoned his puzzle to build a tower out of blocks. A perfectly ordinary child doing perfectly ordinary things, unaware that his existence had been the fulcrum for a war fought with medicine and markets. I'll take the job, she said. Adrian's expression shifted, relief and calculation mixing in equal measure. Good. I'll have the contracts drawn up. But I keep the janitor's keys. He stopped mid-sentence. What? Becca pulled the key ring from her pocket, and the same one she'd carried for 3 years at St. Jude's Hospital. Service entrances, supply closets, areas the public never saw. I keep these as a reminder that I'm not here to manage your image or protect your reputation. I'm here to clean up your messes. And that means I go where the mess is, not where it looks good. Adrian studied her for a long moment, the kind of assessment he probably gave to merger targets and hostile competitors. Then he smiled, small and genuine. Keep the keys, but I'm upgrading your office from a supply closet. I don't need an office. You need somewhere to store the files you're going to accumulate. Adrian stood, collecting both empty glasses. Because if you're auditing my entire organization, you're going to need space for evidence. He left the room, presumably to draft contracts that would transform Becca Marie from invisible janitor to visible threat. from the woman who cleaned floors to the woman who cleaned house. Becca stayed in Jalen's room, watching the boy build towers and knock them down with the unburdened joy of someone who didn't remember being dead for 13 minutes. Outside, the sun was setting over the harbor, casting long shadows across 12 acres of waterfront property that had been in the Smith family since Adrian's grandfather ran bootleg whiskey through the docks. She looked down at the keyring in her hand. 3 years of anonymity, of staying off the grid, of avoiding situations where her skills mattered. All of it ended the moment she walked through that yellow caution tape and told 9 doctors they were treating the wrong problem. Becca pocketed the keys and stood up. She had contracts to review, security protocols to redesign, and an entire organization to audit for vulnerabilities that Adrian's 17 consultants had somehow missed. The janitor's keys stayed in her pocket, a reminder that she'd started at the bottom, worked from the inside, and learned a long time ago that the most important messes weren't the ones you could see. They were the ones hiding in plain sight, waiting for someone willing to get their hands dirty. And Becca Marie had never been afraid of dirty work.